Welcome to Just One Long Thing, a series of special editions of my BBC Radio 4 podcast, Just One Thing, where I quiz the world's leading health experts on the best ways to live well. From talking to strangers to boost happiness, to ageing disgracefully to live longer. I'll be learning the top tips that the experts swear by to maximise your health and well-being. And as this is a Just One Thing special, I'll end each interview by asking our expert to choose the one personal health hack that they would say is the single most effective way you can improve your life. In this sleep special, I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Russell Foster, who is director of the Sleep and Circadian Neuroscience Institute at the University of Oxford. Russell is one of the world's leading researchers into what makes our body clocks tick. Hello, Russell. Great to have you with us.
Great to be here, Michael.
Now, we have all heard about our biological clock, otherwise known as our circadian rhythm. So before we get on to your 5 top tips, why is your circadian clock so central to sleep?
Sleep, of course, is immensely complicated. The states of consciousness and sleep involve a complete realignment of every neurotransmitter within the brain and an interaction between multiple brain structures. But the timing of sleep is governed by 2 factors. The circadian system, which essentially timestamps. Now is the appropriate time to be awake. Now is the appropriate time to be asleep. So essentially everything we do is being fine-tuned to the varied demands of the 24-hour day. And of course, a big chunk of that is the sleep consciousness, the sleep-wake cycle. But that interacts with perhaps the most intuitive thing about sleep is the longer you've been awake, the greater the need for sleep, the greater the build-up of sleep pressure. And there seem to be many things that contribute to sleep pressure, but one very important one is the build-up of adenosine within the brain. And of course, what's very interesting is that a cup of coffee, the caffeine in the coffee, will block adenosine receptors, and that's why you feel genuinely more awake.
So there are 2 things going on when you are feeling sleepy. One is the build-up of adenosine. It's been a while since I've slept. I'm feeling sleepy. But the other is your circadian clock saying, time to go to bed. And there is literally a clock, or at least a bunch of cells in your suprachiasmatic nucleus. Is that right?
There is this master clock. So what the master clock does is to regulate billions of individual cellular clocks distributed throughout the organ systems of the body. So the shorthand is the body clock, but actually it's a circadian system, which is beautifully aligned to deliver the right stuff at the right time of day.
So it's a bit like Big Ben, and then there are all these clocks or watches that we have, which and we kind of align with them, but sometimes they fall out of alignment.
Absolutely. I mean, the analogy I've used is it's a bit like the members of an orchestra. You've got the conductor, which is the master clock, and then all the players in the orchestra hopefully keeping the appropriate alignment with each other and with the master clock. And of course, it can break down. So instead of a symphony, you can have a musical cacophony. And that's a bit like what happens when our circadian system fails and breaks down.
Are you a good sleeper?
Am I a good sleeper? Yes, mostly. Except if I have some worrying stuff going on. But actually, yes. And of course, I'm sure we'll come on to this, but the great enemy of sleep is anxiety. Most of us don't have a sleep problem at all. It's dealing with the anxiety that can perturb our sleep-wake cycle.
Great. We will come on to that.
Yes.
So, yes, what is your first tip?
I think the first one would be don't obsess about the mythical 8 hours of sleep. It's an average. And National Sleep Foundation tells us that a perfectly healthy range is between 6 hours to 10 and a half, maybe even 11. And so it's really finding what your sleep needs are. I mean, I've had people come up to me after public lectures and say, I don't get 8 hours of sleep. Am I going to die? And I would say, well, I can guarantee you're going to die, but it may have nothing to do with not getting the 8 hours. And these sorts of instructions, almost demands, you must get 8 hours of sleep, generate huge anxiety. And what we've got now is sleep anxiety. And people will feel terrified that they won't get the sleep they've been told they need, rather than listening to their own sleep and individual needs.
How do you know if you're getting enough sleep?
Well, I think it's a really important issue because we're all incredibly different. I know it's an old hackneyed phrase that, one shoe size doesn't fit all. And that's why it's so important for us to work out what our individual sleep needs are. And of course, they change as we age. But the question you should ask yourself is, do you feel that you can perform at your peak during the day? And we all know whether we're not firing on all cylinders. But also, if you oversleep extensively on free days, and particularly when you go on holiday, that can really unmask, your endogenous sleep pattern. Are you dependent upon an alarm clock or somebody else to haul you out of bed in the morning? Do you take a long time to wake up? Do you have this grogginess, this sleep inertia? Do you feel sleepy, irritable when you are awake? Do you crave a nap during the day? Do you find you're doing stupid and unreflective things? Are you being overly impulsive and thinking, well, I wouldn't normally behave like that? If you're craving caffeinated, sugar-rich drinks, that's another really important sign. And then finally, listen to your friends, family and colleagues. Are they saying, you seem to be more irritable? You don't quite have the same empathy. You seem to be doing more disinhibited things. And so these are the sorts of things we need to assess for ourselves. And it's not really rocket science. We know whether we're not getting enough sleep or not.
Now, you said, look, one of the myths is that you absolutely need to have 8 hours. Another myth is that you have to have it in a constant burst.
Yeah, that's also absolutely fascinating. And so Roger Ekirk did some studies looking at the sleep patterns in the pre-industrial era and noted in many diary entries and reports and Shakespearean discussions that there was a bimodal pattern of sleep. I had a wonderful first sleep. And so it seems that given the opportunity, humans, like all mammals, incidentally, will go to sleep. They'll then wake up after a few hours, interact at some level, then go back to sleep again, and then have another episode of sleep and then wake up in the morning. And that may even be polyphasic, not just biphasic, where you'll wake up multiple times during the night. This sort of study, this sort of essentially sociology, then influenced Tom Weir. So what Tom did
He's a sleep scientist.
He's a sleep scientist, yeah. Was to take individuals, give them 12 hours of light, 12 hours of darkness, and monitor their sleep. And with this expanded sleep opportunity, he saw that they flipped into the bimodal sleep pattern. And so I think the default state is not a single block of sleep, but bimodal or polyphasic. And the problem is that most people don't know that. So when they wake up, they think, oh my God, that's it. I may as well start drinking coffee and do my emails, rather than staying relaxed, keeping the lights low, and you will get back to sleep. I, at my advanced age now, often find that I wake in the middle of the night. And I have a trick, which is to listen to Radio 3 or Radio 4 Extra. Now, Radio 4 Extra is fantastic. 15 minutes of Lord Peter Wimsey. And if that isn't on, then it'll be In Our Time with Melvin Bragg. And of course, they usually, they're great, but they're very comforting. And I find that they will send me off to sleep within 10, 15 minutes.
Right. So it's not because it's boring, but because it's relaxing.
Absolutely not. No. In fact, I've been on one of those programs, so I have to defend them.
What about listening to music?
Yes, I listen to music, Radio 3, and I find that can be incredibly soothing. And I love music anyway, but I think in the middle of the night, and you can listen, and it's usually very relaxing, very calming music.
What you're describing, I do as well. I wake up typically at 3 a.m. I used to lie there worrying about the fact that I was awake, that if I didn't go back to sleep, I would feel terrible the next day, and all the awful things would happen to my brain. Since I read that research by the historian, the idea that actually pre-industrial age people just did that. They went to bed at 9 o'clock, they got up at 2 or 3 in the morning, they had sex, or they went round and did the cleaning, they did something, and then they went back to bed again. I've been much more relaxed about it. And like you, I basically just find something to do. I lie there, I breathe, I try and meditate. If that's not working, I get out of bed.
Yeah, exactly right, yes. And I think if only that message was more commonly known, there would be far less anxiety about waking up in the middle of the night.
Got it. So your tip number 1 is don't agonise about 8 hours, because that'll just make you anxious and mean you're not going to get a decent night's sleep. If you wake up in the middle of the night, don't worry about it. It could be that's how we are programmed. That's kind of how it's meant to be.
Exactly.
Find something soothing. It could be Melvin and brag. It could be music, it could be whatever floats your boat in the middle of the night. Just go with it, and hopefully sleep will return and you'll just drift off again. So how did you get interested in circadian research?
I think I got interested as an undergraduate. I did zoology because I was interested in weird photoreceptors. And I read in this classic zoology tome that there were, in addition to the eyes, photoreceptors within the pineal complex. So lampreys actually have a third eye sticking out of the top of their skull. Some reptiles do, some lizards do, the famous New Zealand tuatara. And I don't know why, but I just found that absolutely extraordinary. And of course, because in the non-mammalian vertebrates, these extra-retinal photoreceptors contain clocks, and those clocks are regulated by local photoreceptors, I became fascinated by circadian rhythms. So that's the sort of circuitous route. But,
that's what I love about science. You go in one place and you come out somewhere completely different.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, I know you are one of the people who really discovered the way that the master clock is reset by light. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, I came from a sensory physiology background, and I couldn't understand how the visual system, which grabs light in a fraction of a second and then forgets it, could also gather and integrate light over long periods at dawn and dusk, and then convey that information to the master clock within the brain. And so we started working on mice. So these animals had lost their visual cells, their rods and cones, and were visually blind. But what blew us away is that they could regulate their circadian system to the light-dark cycle. And at that point, we thought, my goodness, maybe there's something else within the eye. Now, the vision community were just horrified. Here was a young scientist saying, there's another receptor within the eye. And, the several comments were, well, if we've been studying the eye for 150 years, are you having the temerity to suggest that we've missed an entire class of photoreceptor? And of course, being young and full of vigor, I said, yes. But it took us 10 years to get all the data. And so the eye is providing us with two extraordinary things. It's giving us our sense of space through vision, but it's also giving us our sense of time because of its regulation of the internal clock. And of course, if you have no eyes, it's a double whammy. There's no sense of space, but there's also no sense of time. And one of my great privileges is working with Blind Veterans UK and veterans who have either radical eye damage or no eyes at all. And I think we're working towards a solution to that problem.
They have terrible sleep and terrible circadian problems.
Terrible, yes. And of course, there's not a great deal you can do about it. After the discovery of those receptors, we've sort of worked our way in to think, well, how do they actually interact with the molecular clockwork in the brain? And we've got a couple of compounds which will fool the clock that it's seen light. One, we've done all the mouse work. We've shown in humans it's safe. So the next big jump is the first set of clinical trials. And if I can end my career by giving back a sense of time to the time blind, I'll go happy.
So let's move on to tip number 2. What would that be?
Big decisions. Big decisions when you've slept on it. And this goes back to what you do when you're asleep. You're not only retaining facts and the stuff that's come in during the day, but you're manipulating and playing with that information. A wonderful set of experiments by Jan Byrne. What he did was devise a really rather complicated cognitive task. And he asked one group to look at the task, to become familiar with the task, but then perform that task that afternoon. And about 20% of the group got it. So quite a small percentage. The second group introduced the task in the morning, performed it the following afternoon, but no sleep. Interestingly, about 20% solved the problem. So he nicely controlled for fatigue there. Of course, the interesting group, introduced in the morning, performed their following afternoon, full night of sleep. 60 to 70% actually solved the problem. So if you want to come up with these innovative solutions to complex problems, if you want to problem solve, then a night of sleep can enormously enhance your capacity to do that. So sleeping on it, which is basically what our grandparents taught us, really does have a basis in science.
And what about examples of people making sort of breakthroughs as a result of sleep? Is that sort of myth or is it real?
No, there's been a lot of reported. So Paul McCartney came up with the tune yesterday, fully formed in his brain when he woke up. Cool. And the benzene ring. He dreamt of a snake biting its tail. And of course, he realized that the carbon atoms were formed within a ring. And he woke up with a clear view of that. The chap that developed the periodic table, Mendeleev, he also woke up with a clear view of how the elements were organized within the periodic table. And I think many of us, anecdotally, have woken in the morning with those thoughts.
And have you?
Well, yes. There's the discovery of those new photoreceptors. I remember, and of course, my background was in these weird extraretinal photoreceptors. And I'd been thinking, well, how can the rods and cones, grab this information? And we got the first data showing that mice with damaged rods and cones were regulating their clocks normally. And I woke up thinking, well, hang on, you just missed a trick here. It's another receptor. Mammals may not have extra retinal photoreceptors. They have an extra retinal photoreceptor, but within the retina. Actually, the hunt was on for an entirely new receptor system within the eye.
Wow. So you're thinking, or you have observed in other animals, that they have these cells which can recognize light, but they're not in their eyes. You knew they didn't appear to exist in humans, but you couldn't find them. Mm-hmm. So you just asked yourself, after a good night's sleep, where else could they be? Wow, they could be in the eye
itself, yes.
And at that moment you go, wow, and it is an unbelievably obvious thing, but only when you said it then. So what's going on in the brain when you have a good night's sleep that improves your decision making?
It seems that the circuitry which has retained the facts, the memory, is beginning to draw with previous memories. And I sort of likened it to a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, which is sort of slightly formed. New bits of the jigsaw puzzle come in, and the brain is saying, well, where does this fit within the scheme of things? And so it takes those little gobbets of information, the pieces of the jigsaw, and tries to fit them into the framework that already exists. Sometimes it fits perfectly, and you've come up with that novel solution to a complex problem. Other times it doesn't. You've got bizarre associations, and maybe that's what dreaming is all about. It's trying to essentially make sense of the world with new bits of information that don't quite fit. And so I think it's the brain playing with information. It's got the luxury of time and the capacity to manipulate the memories it's got, the new memories it's formed, and the immediate experiences it's encountered.
So your brain is still extremely active even when you're asleep?
Absolutely, yes. During the day, you've got this massive information coming in. You're overwhelmed. You're moving within an environment. You're interacting. You're doing lots of different things. And once you're asleep, the sensory systems have shut down in a sense, or largely shut down. So you've got that capacity within the brain to start to manipulate the information. You can't do it all whilst you're awake because you're just being overwhelmed with information and stuff going on. But during sleep, you've got the luxury of sitting back and reflecting, as it were.
So you should sleep on it, but is there a time of day when you are at your most alert?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Many studies have shown that cognitive performance in adults peaks at around about 11, 12 o'clock in the morning. That's for adults. Interestingly, teenagers are shifted by 2 hours or more. So they're peaking at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And certainly when exams have been set later in the day, rather than first thing in the morning, there's been an increase in exam success. It also raises, I think, a very interesting tension. You've got fairly elderly teachers coming in. They're fantastic. They're bouncing off the walls first thing in the morning. They're squeezing all the demanding lessons, at that time of day. The students are sort of fast asleep. And so that's not a good time for them, but it's a great time for the teacher. In the later afternoon, 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the teenagers that are bouncing off the walls, their cognitive capacity at its peak. And of course, the teachers are now declining.
Slumping. Do you find that with your students as well?
A little bit. But then, I'm a late chronotype, so I'm much more with the kids.
So to sum up, if you're having a life-changing decision to make, don't do it when you're tired at the end of the day. Sleep on it. And if you're older, like me or Russell, then do it about 11 o'clock in the morning. And if you're a teenager, then you're probably better off making those decisions at some time in the middle of the afternoon when you're actually at your brightest. You're listening to Just One Long Thing with me, Michael Mosley. And I'm here talking to Professor Russell Foster for this sleep special. So moving on to tip number 3.
Know your chronotype. Now, chronotype, of course, is your preference for being either a morning, an intermediate, or a late type. And these have various names. I prefer the old ones, which is if you're a lark, that's about 10% of the population. So you're feeling tired, you want to go to sleep sort of 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the evening. Most of us in the middle as doves, 65% of the population, we're going to bed at around about 11 o'clock or maybe a little bit earlier. And then the night owls, 25% of the population, going to sleep certainly after midnight, closer to 2 o'clock. Now, what's so fascinating about chronotype is that it's an amalgam of 3 key factors. One are genetics. And I think one of the glorious success stories in circadian biology over the past 20 years has been the realization that there are clock genes and that subtle changes, polymorphisms in these clock genes can be associated with morningness and eveningness. So in terms of the genetic contribution of our parents, they're still telling us what time to go to bed and what time to get up. So it's genetics. The second is our age. So from about the age of 10, there's a sharp rise in wanting to go to bed later and later and later. So there's a later chronotype. Now this peaks in our late teens and early 20s. Then from those early 20s, there's a move to an earlier chronotype. So the time we get into our late 50s and 60s, we're getting up and going to bed at about the time we did when we were 10, 11, 12.
Okay, right.
But it's significant. So, for example, that's a 2-hour difference. So somebody in their late teens, early 20s will want on average to go to bed about 2 hours later than somebody in their late 50s, early 60s. So asking a teenager to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning is like asking a 55-year-old to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So it's a big effect. What's the cause? Well, we think almost certainly the changing levels in the sex steroids, that sharp rise across puberty, and then the slow decline in those hormones as we enter old age. So you've got genetics, you've got your age and the influence of the sex steroids, but the third thing is what's so critical because we can manipulate it. And that's when you see light. We've talked about the importance of light in setting the internal clock to the external world. But light does different things at different times. Morning light will advance the clock, make you get up earlier and go to bed earlier, while dusk light will delay the clock, make you go to bed later and get up later. But the good thing about that is that if you want to become more of a morning person, it's brutal, but it can be done. You set the alarm clock and you get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and you go outside and experience bright natural light. And that will advance the clock and be much better for getting up earlier. And so you can sort of advance your clock a little bit, even if you're an extreme late type.
I gathered as well camping is quite a good way of doing this.
Yes, you're referring to that wonderful study by Ken Wright from University of Colorado. And what he did was he looked at the sleep-wake timing of a group of students in their natural habitat as students. And then he took them up into the Rocky Mountains and they slept in tents for a week with only natural light. And in that group, they advanced their wake times and sleep times by 2 hours, which is a great example that if you're exposed to the natural light dark cycle, it can have a big effect upon your chronotype and your morningness and eveningness.
So essentially they were owls and they became more lark-like as a result of going camping for a week.
Exactly. Yes, and we've talked about this. We said, does it matter what time of year? And he's like, I've got to do those experiments. Frankly, I'd be terrified of the black bears.
Now, my problem is the other way around. I tend to wake up early. I'm probably not really a lark because I'm not going to bed at 7, but I am certainly very tired by 10 o'clock and I tend to wake up earlier than I want to. So should I be doing the reverse, basically trying to avoid some of the morning light and have more afternoon light?
Exactly, yes. So you wear dark glasses, keep the blinds shut, and then make sure you're out late in the afternoon, early evening. Exactly, and then you become more like the rest of us.
No, and my wife would be delighted because she is much more. I've had my genes tested, and it turns out that yes, I have quite a lot of larkiness about me, whereas my wife is much more of an owl. So come a party, I want to leave at 10:30 and go to bed. She's just waking up. I was going to ask you about food and the impact of what you eat as well. So say you are an owl and you want to become more lark-like. Light is the key. Does when you eat matter?
Yes, it does. It can help consolidate the sleep-wake timing, so it reinforces the light signal, as does exercise. So eating at the same time and ideally concentrating your food intake during the first half of the day and combining that with exercise, so going for a walk or a run in the morning has been shown to consolidate sleep-wake timing. I think it's quite amusing that individuals with dogs are reported to have better sleep-wake. And that's often attributed to the effect of having a companion animal. I think it's because, of course, you have to get up and take the dog out for a walk first thing in the morning. So you're getting your exercise and you're getting your light, which is great for the circadian system.
So ideally, as I am a bit of a lark and I would like to be less larky, I should send out my wife with the dog in the morning so she gets the morning light, and I should be going out with the dog in the afternoon.
A perfect solution.
And the dog gets 2 walks and is very happy.
Yeah.
So your advice is train your chronotype to fit your lifestyle. If you are a lark and you want to be the life and soul of the party and not get up quite as early, then have your light later in the day. If you are, on the other hand, an owl like you are, or indeed teenagers are, and you want to shift so that you're going to bed earlier and getting up a bit earlier, then make sure you're getting the bright early morning light. And the best way to do that is just go outdoors. Great, Russell. What is your next tip?
Well, I think a great night's sleep starts from when you wake up. We're used to thinking that the quality of our sleep defines the quality of our consciousness, our wake state, but it's reciprocal. The quality of our wake state will very much influence the quality of the sleep that we get. And this is where we also have lots of control. I think so many people feel that sleep is what you get and there's very little you can do about it. But there's masses we can do about it. And we can divide it up to during the day, before bed, the bedroom itself, and then what we're doing in bed. So if we start with during the day, for most of us, it's getting up and getting that morning light. And of course, if you're a lark, it's the opposite. You need to get more of that evening light. If you feel that you need a nap, if you haven't got the sleep that you really need at night, then a 20-minute nap or so can be useful. Around about lunchtime, it will improve your ability to function later in the day. But make sure those naps are no longer than 20 minutes and they're not too close to bedtime. Otherwise, they can be completely counterproductive. Also, avoid excessive consumption of caffeine. I don't drink caffeine, for example, after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Caffeine, of course, is blocking those adenosine receptors, which are so important in giving us our sleep drive. And of course, once the adenosine is broken down, you can then feel overwhelmingly tired. And so you have to be careful about caffeine. It's a dangerous drug in some sense. It's great for alerting short term. But if, for example, you've got a long drive and you take a cup of coffee, it kicks in at about 20, 30 minutes. But then after a few hours, it'll wear off and you can have a massive sleepiness drive. So be careful about when you take your caffeine. So at the end of the day, you've got to be very careful about stepping back from the anxieties that you've experienced. And so I used to be quite rude about mindfulness. I mean, I had it in the same box as crystal waving, and I abjectly apologize. The data now are very clear. Mindfulness for some people can be a terrific relaxation technique, as can yoga. I for example, when I can go for a swim at the end of the day, and I find that really just burns off all of that stress. So most people, of course, don't have a sleep problem. They have a stress or an anxiety thing. And so winding down at the end of the day is critically important and is often overlooked.
Do you actually ever do a sort of worry half hour? One of the suggestions is you choose a moment in time, a couple of hours before bedtime, and you write down all the things you're worried about so that you don't have to worry about them at 3 a.m.
That would be the last thing I'd want to do because I would remember them and it would remind me of all the horrors. So no, that wouldn't work for me, but it might for some. So before bed, reduce the lights so you're not increasing alertness. Stop using electronic devices, and this is really tricky, at least 30 minutes before you're going to sleep. Avoid prescription medications, or indeed alcohol. These are sedatives. They do not provide a biological mimic for sleep. And they can actually hamper some of the important processes going on within the brain when we sleep, such as memory consolidation. Alcohol is devastating for the consolidation of memory. And so the bedroom, it shouldn't be too warm, so about 18 degrees for most of us, and that's because to get to sleep, you have to experience a drop in core body temperature of about 1 degree. If you're too hot, then that can be a problem. And what's happening biologically is you're shunting blood from the core to the periphery and losing heat from the hands and feet. Now, what's interesting, of course, people with circulatory problems who have cold hands and feet find it more difficult to lose that core body temperature. So one trick is to have bed mittens and bed socks. I mean, maybe not very romantic, but it does help it for many people to get to sleep.
What do you think about having a hot shower or bath about an hour before bed?
Yeah, as long as it's not too warm. I think if you get that vasodilation, you're shunting blood from the core to the periphery, and that certainly can help. And many people, of course, find a bath before bed very relaxing. So, of course, keep it quiet. If you're living in a very noisy dormitory or whatever, that can be tricky, but white noise, whale song, a good friend of mine uses, doesn't work for me, but, those sorts of lulling noises can be useful in cancelling out. Now, one of the great problems, of course, is that bedrooms have become workrooms since COVID. How many Zoom calls have you had where you can see somebody's unmade bed in the background? This is difficult because you're mixing up the sleeping space with the working space. And so if at all possible, get the computers, get all of those devices out. What you want is a bedroom that is this haven for sleep. That's where you go as a cocoon to embrace sleep. And so get those distraction and those work things out if you possibly can.
Okay, so basically, in summary, if you want a good night's sleep, you need to start early in the day. You need to start with light or avoiding light. It's what you eat. It's how you prepare your bedroom. It's essentially what sleep scientists call sleep hygiene. It's ensuring that your bedroom, as you say, is a place where you go to sleep, to have sex, and nothing else. Okay, Russell, what's your fifth and final tip?
Well, don't have difficult conversations when tired. I think this is a really important point. There's two elements to this. I mean, in my household, we do not discuss family finances or anything stressful when we're lying in bed together at the end of the day. And of course, for many couples, that's the only time that they get. But the anxiety that generates in me is so great that we've banned those conversations to the next morning. But I think the other important point to make is that the tired brain is a very strange organ. There's some beautiful studies that have shown that the tired brain will remember negative experiences, but it'll forget the positive ones. So one's whole worldview is biased by a negative salience. And so I think one's got to be very careful about those difficult conversations once you're tired. You're also much more likely to have, a loss of empathy. So you won't pick up the social signals in whoever you're talking to. You'll have greater levels of impulsivity, saying stupid and unreflective things, and you'll have greater levels of irritability. So this is not a good time to have a conversation. And it relates, I think, really very interestingly to sort of things like the divorce rate. If you think about the divorce rate in night shift workers, it can be 6 times higher for the night shift compared to the day shift. And we don't provide the education. We don't let night shift workers know what's going to happen to them, either physiologically or emotionally. Not only them, but the people they share their lives with. And we've got to do a much better, I think, job on that educational component within relationships.
Because certainly when it comes to night shift workers, a lot of people don't have a choice. So, yes, I completely agree with that tip. I try to avoid having any sort of discussion with a strong, element of emotion late at night with Claire, because otherwise I'll say something, she'll say something, and then you're up half the night sort of debating it.
Disentangling.
Exactly.
The impulsive
Don't go there.
comment.
Don't go there at all. Wait until the morning, and mostly
but it's so
got better.
obvious, isn't it, when you think about it? But so many of us fell into that trap when we had less experience.
So your tip number 5 is essentially to leave those tricky discussions until the morning when you're fully rested.
Absolutely, yes. And of course, we might want to think about the way we schedule our family interactions. Many of us have children who are not living at home or maybe living in different parts of the world. And of course, we want to enjoy those conversations. If they're squeezed into the end of the day when we're tired and we're trying to get to bed, it can't work. So what we try and do in our family is we have them at the weekend where we can enjoy that conversation and we don't feel pressurized or rushed.
One of my challenges is my kids are owls. It's partly their age, partly what the genetics they've inherited, I think, from Claire. So they like to ring up at 11:30 at night to have a nice little chat. And by that time, I'm sort of keeling over. So it's not a great
you can
thing.
explain you don't have a chronotype that can fully accommodate this behaviour.
Come back to me in 30 years' time when you're a lark as well. Okay, Russell, you've given us 5 great tips to improve your sleep, but if you were going to offer people just one sleep tip, what would that be?
Well, I think it's that a good night of sleep is defined by when you first wake up. I mean, as we said, the quality of your daytime is defined by the quality of your sleep, and the quality of your sleep is defined by what you're doing during the day. And I think that's the essential thing. Structure things such that it enhances your sleep at night.
Brilliant. Now, my top tip, I think, would be don't agonize at 3 a.m. about the fact that you are awake. So I used to agonize and get really irritated about it. Now I accept the fact it just happens. It happens to a lot of people. And either I listen to whale music, whatever it is, or I find some piece of audio to listen to, or if I'm just not going back to sleep, I just get out of bed and wait until I'm tired and then I go back to bed. And I have to say, I think that's been the biggest change, that I no longer agonize about the fact that I'm awake. I
think that's absolutely crucial. I remember speaking to somebody and I was saying, yes, just get out of bed and just read a few pages of Jane Austen. And this person came up to me at the end and said, does it have to be Jane Austen?
Well, thank you so much, Russell. It's been absolutely wonderful hearing about your research and what your advice is. I think you've really given us some great top tips to choose from. 1, don't obsess about the 8 hours sleep and don't worry if you're awake in the middle of the night. 2, with big decisions, sleep on it. Thirdly, train your chronotype to suit your lifestyle. 4, don't have difficult conversations when tired. And finally, a good night's sleep starts from when you wake up. And that is your top tip. Thank you very much, Professor Russell Foster.
Thank you.